entitlement. The pain you endure.
The day I watched my face burn, the skin cracked and curled as fire seared away the moisture. Charred flesh retreated from the heat and shriveled into a huddled black mess. One blue eye, identical to my own, held me in place, made me watch. In an instant, it was the face of a stranger, and we were no longer twins. The memory tugged at my hand, pulled it to my cheek. I was startled by the smoothness that met the pads of my fingertips. My brother's phantom grip still clutched my arm. I felt the bones beneath his skin reach out, try to escape the pain, and fail. Arkin had writhed for hours before sleep granted him mercy. My own bed remained empty. The sheets were tight and immaculate against the mattress. Though not opulent, the bed seemed inappropriate. Its sleek, simple design was an insult to the war that raged outside. I grabbed the top sheet and rubbed it across my eyes, forehead and mouth, staining it with the sweat and sand. The soiled white fabric brought bile to my throat. I crumpled it into a ball and threw it back onto the mattress. My quarters, a glorified tent, provided a false sense of security. It drowned out the wind and the screams of our injured, but I knew the fighting continued. Darth Atroxa would not die easily. Her forces were loyal and ambitious, with a strong will to live. But she would fall. Arkin would see to that. I heard the knight's steps before she knocked on my door. "Come in, Your Highness." She kneeled upon entering and waited to be spoken to. A tiresome dance enforced by father. Using the force, I pulled a chair from the corner of the room and sat. "Tell me of my brother." "Prince Arkin is stable." Her face was hidden beneath the traditional helm of a Zakul knight. Father changed our guards regularly to prevent attachments. The Knights of Zakul were our servants, but his followers and subjects. He was their god. We only represented an extension of his will.
With your birth comes a solemn vow. You will have nothing.
Over there!
Your privilege is the dirt.
He has not awoken. She hesitated. "No, my prince." Her unease was vexing. It wasn't a question. I would feel if he was awake. Yes, Your Highness." Her gaze locked to the floor. It was easy to toy with the knights. Their blind devotion to father made them susceptible targets. As children, Arkin and I would switch clothes and play pranks on our guards, but I was too old for such games now. I could smell the grime beneath her armor. This knight had fought with us today, and for that, she deserved my respect. "Forgive me," I sighed. "I'm tired. Will that be all?" "The immortal Emperor Valkorion, Slayer of Isaacs, requires an update." The titles were spoken barely above a whisper, as if my father would strike her down for uttering them too boldly. "I shall speak to him alone. Thank you." I waved her away. "As you wish, my prince," she answered and stepped back out of the tent. I listened to her retreating footsteps, then activated my holocom. Father's silhouette filled the tent. He stood tall with his hands behind his back. I kneeled. "Report. Our healers tried to save Arkin's arm, but were unsuccessful. He was fitted with a cybernetic replacement in the field. As for the burns on his face, a report of the planet Thexan." My head snapped upward. "Father, your brother made his choice. I told him to stay on Zakul. He paid the price for defiance." His voice chilled the air. "This campaign was his vision," I pressed. "We were meant to topple the core worlds together, in your name." "His vision is narrow. Perhaps losing an eye will open his mind." There was neither warmth nor malice in his tone. "Now report." My muscles tightened. I was thankful Arkin was not awake. His patience with father grew thinner with each interaction.
Your birthright. The losses you suffer.
I tried to explain that this was just his way. that Father only pushed us to be stronger, but it was becoming harder to placate Arkan's anger. I cleared my throat and obeyed. Acceptable casualties on our side. Darth Atroxa remains a threat, but I'm confident she will be neutralized. With her downfall, victory will be ours. Do not underestimate the Sith, Father warned. Though quaint, they will do whatever it takes to survive, and, unlike the Jedi, they are not held back by lofty ideals of false morality. Without waiting for my response, he turned and cut the transmission. I sighed. Fatigue was catching up to me. There would be another battle tomorrow. My brother's presence pulled up my attention. I hurried to the adjoining tent. 3 droids and 2 healers stood over Arkan. I winced at the shrill sound of drilling. Arkan's remaining fist clenched the sheets as they fitted him with a Durasteel mask. Finished, Your Highness. My brother stared at the ceiling. The mask covered more than half of his face and wrapped around the back of his skull. There was nothing human about its design. It was meant to intimidate as Arkan demanded. Scorched skin peeked from the edges, a testament to the ruined visage beneath. Levers, I ordered. The droids and healers bowed, then scurried away. Alone, Arkan relaxed. His exposed left brow knotted in pain as he looked down at the cybernetic arm. My stomach churned as we both assessed the day's losses. A man can have anything if he's willing to sacrifice.
A man can have anything if he's willing to sacrifice.
Father's teachings were like poison on Arkan's tongue. His modulated voice sounded foreign. You have sacrificed enough, I assured him. No, Fexen. His eye met mine. This is only the first payment. There will be more. Time slurred, and yet the world spun around us as I felt my brother slip away from me. On Zakul, Arkan and I had conversations without words. We moved in tandem, flowed like water with one mind and purpose.
Your freedom will be the wars you wage.
But he was different now. I could feel the rage building inside of him. A rage I did not share.
And when darkness finds you, you will face it alone.
I took his metallic hand. How much are you willing to give? Everything, Arkan said without hesitation. Will you not do the same? I will fight for you, brother, I pledged. Your dreams are mine. Cold metal fingers squeezed my arm and lit a flame of hope inside me. They say time heals all wounds. The Imperial Guard stood at attention as Darth Lacris strode down the hall to the Dark Council chamber. Red sand clung to her hair and robes, the colour an intense contrast to the sterile walls of the academy. She did not presume to know why her master had summoned her. Assumptions were dangerous, an acolyte's move that she had long outgrown. The door opened with a hiss. Darth Maul sat alone, still as the statues of dead Sith carved into Korriban's bedrock. Upon reaching the middle of the room, Darth Lacris kneeled. Sweat ran down her back despite the cool air inside the chamber. Master, she whispered. The cords and spikes of the armor encasing Darth Maul's body gleamed in the chamber's blue glow. He remained seated and silent, but she knew he was aware of her presence. Her master possessed the shape of a man, yet his voice was devoid of emotion, a human shell hollowed out to be filled by the dark side. When he finally deigned to speak to her, the marrow within Lacris's bones tingled. Apprentice, tell me what you know of Lord Califo. Well, this was a surprise. Darth Thanaton's former master? Only know what you've told me. He was a fool. A fool, yes, but one who served his purpose. He motioned her to rise, as you will serve yours. Darth Maul stood. His shadow fell across her, Power must be earned. Lord Khalifa failed to understand that and paid the price. And how do Khalifa's missteps involve me? She kept her voice steady. A single moment of weakness and he would seize upon it. Ma approached her with slow, deliberate steps, hands resting on the small of his back. Her master never rushed, always maintained an appearance of control. I sense a similar hunger for power in you. Do not bother denying it. I see no reason to. In an instant, he was gone. Her nostrils flared slightly as she tried to sense his presence. You believe you have earned that power, but you are mistaken. His voice thundered behind her. She did not flinch. Lacris had been Darth Ma's apprentice long enough to know that he was testing her. He pulled out his holocom to display the Niverta system and zoomed in to focus on a single planet. The Empire requires Balmorra pacified, he explained. The resistance is growing due in part to Governor Melchiro's bungling. What started as a simple annoyance has become a thorn in our side we can no longer ignore. Lacris was aware of the situation on Balmorra. Melchiro offered only excuses for his failures. He was a worm she'd like to watch rife beneath her boots. You have shown promise, both in your training and on the battlefield, Ma continued. But I cannot just give you Balmorra. I must earn it. She understood. A trial then? The flickering image of Balmorra vanished. Of sorts. Which brings us back to Lord Khalifa, fool though he was. He taught one valuable lesson. Closing her eyes, Lacris searched her memories. Sith teachings whispered to her. Sifting through them, an uneasiness spread across her body. Bile stung the back of her throat, the further she delved into herself. Then she found it. Foresight becomes clearest the closer you are to death. Very good. You intend for me to experience a vision of Balmorra? She looked at his masked face and wondered if he was smiling. Did he even have lips left to smile, or was it true that the dark side had ruined his features beyond human recognition? Darth Maul lowered his hood. His right hand detached the lightsaber from his hip. I will push you to the brink of death. You will tell me what you see. If you lie, I will know, and I shall no longer need an apprentice. So be it, she said, and unsheathed her own lightsaber. The rage, always waiting in the pit of her stomach, stirred. Heat washed over her limbs and heart, loosening them for battle. Darth Lacris did not hesitate. Lightning danced through her muscles and in her arm to burst from her fingertips. Ma tilted his head to miss the purple bolts. The sight of him fueled her hatred. She charged, lightsaber cutting the air above her. Lacris's roar swallowed all sound in the chamber. Darth Maul held his ground, stalwart against her attacks. Circling her master, she dashed in and out, slashing, searching for an opening. He gave her none. Lacris prepared for another assault. Arms outstretched, electricity rained down on Ma. One bolt struck his leg, causing a momentary twitch. Immeasurable joy drummed within her. The Dark Council member held out his left hand. Lacris heard the sound of her skull crack against a wall before she felt it. The blow threatened to quell her rage, cut off her power. Lacris refused to give him the satisfaction. She grimaced and pushed herself to stand. This isn't over, she snarled through clenched teeth. No. Searing white pain shot through her and melded with the hatred within, twisting it into something else. The life seeped from Lacris's pores, cracks of lightning loud in her ears, blood bubbled in scorched veins, her vision went black. With the darkness came relief. She filled her lungs with even breaths and willed her eyes to open. His voice was both distant and close. What do you see? Skulls. Hundreds upon thousands of skulls littered a muddy field. The soil was stained with blood, the air with smoke. A giggle of delight slipped through her lips. Destruction, master. Look deeper. The smoke covering the field took shape, gathering the skulls to give them false life. The shadow played their parts, fighting, killing, dying to create a single man. His fears and desires were etched into the dead men who fought for him. The Resistance's leader, Lacris murmured, is a Republic soldier? Will he be a problem? The soldier born of smoke and skulls reached towards her. Lacris readied herself, but before the darkness could touch her, another shadow charged in. Slicing through the soldier, the skulls fell and the smoke dissipated. Lacris gasped. Someone here, someone powerful, but their face, it's clouded. Will the Republic soldier be a problem? Her master asked again. The field returned to ruin, her shadowy savior gone. No. Kneeling down, she plunged her fingers into the Balmoran soil. The core spoke to her through the dry roots. The power within the planet presented endless possibilities. Lacris had never known true happiness, but holding a planet's beating heart in her fist, she couldn't help but smile. Balmora will be mine. Lost in her passion, Lacris did not notice the smoke swirled around her. Two shadows towered over her, their features ever changing in the smoke. Lacris tried to pull her hands from the ground, but the roots latched onto her wrists, holding her in place. The end was swift, a splash of cold water, and then nothingness. She shivered on the dark council chamber floor. Are you afraid? She need not answer. The chamber reeked of her fear. The stench permeated the walls. Darth Maul raised his right hand, bringing Lacris to her feet by her throat. She clawed at the force tightening around her windpipe. Did I fail? She wondered. Retracing her steps through the vision, the memory was already hazy. You cannot escape death. Consider this my final lesson. Darth Maul released his grip and she fell, gasping. Only a coward runs from the inevitable. You are not a coward, my apprentice. It was the only compliment she had ever received from him. You have done well. A shuttle awaits to take you to Sobrik. The Empire can no longer afford Melchiro's incompetence. Relieve him of his duty. Darth Lacris watched him leave, heart pounding as she considered her master's words. The future was ever changing. There was still time to alter her fate. Senya braced herself as she began her descent. The polluted atmosphere of Ord Mantell made turbulence common. Tightening her grip on the controls, she fought to stabilize the shuttle as it rattled and bucked. A sharp, high-pitched beep rose from the back of the ship. The various machines hooked up to Arkan's unconscious body in the makeshift medbay signaling in protest as they were jostled by the rough ride. She was coming in fast and steep, making the turbulence worse. But the longer she stayed airborne, the greater the chance the sensors from the surface would pick her up. The people of Ord Mantell had no love for the Eternal Throne's new Empress, but the massive reward Vaylin was offering for her mother's capture might be enough to make some of them reconsider their loyalties. The surface of the planet below her was virtually invisible in the night's gloom, but Senya knew where she was going. She punched in the coordinates and brought the shuttle safely down a few kilometers away from her destination. Making the last part of her journey on foot may have been overly cautious, but the stakes were too high to take unnecessary chances. She checked on her comatose son one last time, ensuring his vitals were stable and all the tubes and wires running to his body were still connected. Satisfied that the landing hadn't jarred anything loose, she exited the shuttle and sealed it behind her. Just coming to Ord Mantell had been a risk, but it was one she was forced to accept. She'd done her best to tend to her son, but Arkan's injuries were beyond her ability to heal. If she couldn't find someone more skilled to help him, he wouldn't last much longer. Allies were in short supply for Senya. She'd turned her back on the Alliance, betraying the Outlander for the sake of her son, and Vaylin was hunting her with all the resources of Zakul and the Eternal Empire. Yet when all seemed darkest, a single ray of hope had emerged from an unlikely source. The Scions. Scattered into hiding since the death of their leader, the visionaries that once guided the Eternal Empire had reached out to her. At first, Senya had suspected some kind of trick. During his reign, Arkan had hunted the Scions to the brink of extinction, but the Scions were driven only by their prophecies and visions, not by vengeance. They claimed they wanted the deposed Emperor to live. They believed he still had some role to play. She hadn't asked what destiny the Scions had foreseen for Arkan. She wasn't even sure. She wanted to know. Saving her son's life was all that mattered, and she was desperate and running out of options. So when the Scions told her to go to Ord Mantell, she had listened. She wasn't here to meet with the Scions themselves, however. They were still too cautious, too vulnerable to risk exposure. Instead, they had sent her to meet with their own kind. The vast majority of the Knights of Zakul were still loyal to the Eternal Throne, regardless of who sat upon it. But given Vaylin's violent history towards their ranks, there were some who were not ready to swear fealty to her. They feared Vaylin would disband or even destroy their order. These men and women who dared to stand against a new Empress, the Scions had explained in their message, were now Senya's best hope. They had medical equipment and supplies she could not acquire, and experts who knew how to properly use them, and they respected Senya. She'd fought side by side with many of them. The others knew her well by reputation. If she could convince them to help her, to help Arkan, they will listen to me. They have to. The night was dark. Ord Mantell's twin moons shrouded by thick, noxious brown clouds. The only illumination came from her lightsaber pike, the soft blue glow of the blade just barely piercing the blackness only a meter ahead. Her steps were slow and cautious. The uneven, hard-packed crust of dirt crunched softly beneath her boots as she made her way through the impenetrable gloom. Based on the coordinates she'd been given, she knew she was close, but something felt off. There was no signs of a camp, no flickers of light in the distance, no whispers of far-off movement, no sentries stepping forward to challenge her approach. Senya reached out warily with the Force, delving into the surrounding darkness. She sensed nothing unusual, but her probings were clumsy and awkward. Her training had focused primarily on using the Force in combat. Her senses now on high alert, she crept forward until her foot stepped into a small puddle. The audible splash brought with it the sharp, almost metallic scent of rhydonium. The sickly smell of fuel amplified her unease, and her fingers clenched around the hilt of her pike. She took another step, then noticed something on the ground. A dark, misshapen shadow barely visible in illumination of her glowing pike. She tilted her weapon downwards to reveal a severed arm at her feet. She recognized the metal gauntlet encasing it. She'd worn the same armor herself for decades. A few steps away she found the rest of the body lying face down, the remaining limbs twisted and contorted into unnatural positions. Steeling herself against a mounting dread, she pressed on further. The second body was only a few meters away, but in the pitch-black surroundings, she didn't notice him until he was at her feet. Unlike the first victim, this one was on his back. In the dim glow of her weapon, she could clearly make out the grotesque expression of pure terror etched on his face. Even though she didn't recognize him, Senya felt a kinship with the fallen warrior. She had been a knight of Zakul herself. These were her brothers and sisters. She had trained with them, lived with them, fought with them. Moving slowly, Senya paced off an ever-widening circle into the darkness. Puddles of rhydonium dotted the ground, the tiny chrome pools reflecting and amplifying the glow of her lightsaber to reveal the broken bodies of several more fallen knights. She had come to their camp for help, knowing they wouldn't turn away one of their own. Now they were dead, their bodies broken and scattered, and Senya knew it was her fault. This wasn't coincidence. Reaching out to the rogue knights had drawn Vaylin's attention. Their blood was on her hands, but she didn't have the luxury of guilt, not if she wanted to save her son. It was time to go. There was nothing here for her now. A soft splash from the darkness snapped her head around. She took a step towards the sound, extending the tip of the pike to investigate. In the soft illumination, she saw something she recognized immediately. A hand-carved child's toy, cast aside and abandoned in the dirt. She braced herself as brisk footsteps approached. A familiar figure materialized from the darkness, her hands alight with crackling sparks of energy. Vaylin flared her fingers out, the sparks arcing from the tips to catch on the rhydonium pool at her feet, setting it ablaze. The fire spread quickly, leaping from puddle to puddle, crisscrossing the surrounding ground to carve out a blazing pattern that lit up the night. With the rising flames, Senya finally witnessed the true carnage Vaylin had unleashed on the camp. Dozens of knights, bodies mutilated and mangled, had been tossed haphazardly among the scattered wreckage of ships and shuttle torn asunder. The full breadth of the slaughter sent a chill down her back, grim evidence of the horrors her daughter was capable of. Senya raised her weapon only to have it wrenched effortlessly from her hands by the Force. The pike sailed 10 meters through the air and into Vaylin's waiting grasp. She could crush my skull in an instant, Senya realized, and I'd be powerless to stop her. But when Vaylin raised the stolen lightsaber pike and charged, she knew that wouldn't happen. Her daughter wanted the visceral pleasure of slicing her down in combat. Using the force to pull the lightsaber of one of the fallen knights into her own hand, Senya met the charge head on. The glowing blades clashed with a loud, crackling hiss, and for an instant, two combatants stood face to face, only centimeters apart, surrounded by the orange flames spreading rapidly through the camp. Senya was close enough to stare into Vaylin's eyes. They burned with hate, pure and savage. All trace of the child that had once clung to her mother's side was gone. Shocked by the intensity of her daughter's vicious loathing, Senya was forced to look away. In that instant, Vaylin dropped down into a crouch, swinging her pike into a wide, sweeping arc meant to cut her mother's legs out from under her, but Senya had already sprung clear with a graceful backflip, landing in a defensive stance to meet Vaylin's next assault. "Afraid to stand and fight me, mother?" Vaylin asked with a sly smile. The flames burning all around them cast strange, flickering shadows across her face. Instead of replying, Senya braced herself for the coming charge, quietly confident in her own skills. They'd clashed once before, and Senya had prevailed. Her daughter might be stronger in the Force, but Senya had spent decades mastering the art of hand-to-hand combat. If Vaylin wanted to fight her, the outcome was inevitable. As expected, Vaylin rushed at her with unrestrained fury, the pike becoming a spinning, whirling instrument of death in her nimble hands. Senya parried the initial flurry, redirecting each blow with subtle counters and deflections that allowed her to slow the momentum of Vaylin's charge. Then she switched from defense to offense, retaliating with her own sequence of quick cuts and thrusts meant not to kill, but to drive her daughter back, keeping her off balance and in perpetual retreat. But instead of giving ground, Vaylin countered with another vicious assault, putting Senya on the defensive again. Surprised, the older woman staggered back, ducking to the side as the pike skimmed past her cheek close enough for her to feel the heat of the glowing blade. It clipped the tip of her shoulder, carving a small chunk from her armor. The next blow nearly took her leg below the knee. At the very last instant, Senya snatched her foot clear, but though she'd spared her limb, she was off balance and out of position. Vaylin pounced, hacking and slashing at her mother. What she lacked in technique, she more than made up for in speed and relentless aggression. Reflexes and instinct honed over 30 years of training allowed Senya to keep the killing blow at bay, but only barely. She ducked and darted to the left, leaping over one of the raging walls of fire crisscrossing the camp. She's stronger now, faster, more confident, but there were still flaws in Vaylin's form. Now that she had measured her opponent, Senya saw subtle imperfections she could exploit. Her daughter leaped over the wall of fire between them and charged again. She was pressing the action, trying to overwhelm Senya and go for the quick kill. On the next pass, Senya let the tip of her lightsaber dip, offering a brief opening. As expected, Vaylin seized on the sudden vulnerability, but Senya was ready. Anticipating her daughter's strike, she sidestepped the blow and got in close enough to throw an elbow into Vaylin's chest, staggering her back. Vaylin caught her footing a step before she stumbled into the nearby flames. Enraged, she rushed her mother again, redoubling her efforts. Senya continued to feint and bait her opponent, using her own aggression against her to control the battle. She could sense her daughter's frustration mounting as the battle dragged on. Her attacks became more desperate, more frenzied. Time and time again, Vaylin saw what she thought would be an opportunity to end the battle in a single blow, only to have it snatched away at the last instant by her elusive foe. Fatigue began to take its toll. The blinding speed of Vaylin's attacks slowed ever so slightly as her muscles began to ache. She was lunging and flailing, off balance and out of sorts. Both combatants were breathing heavily. But unlike her daughter, Senya had been pacing herself, holding something in reserve. "You still fight with too much raw emotion," Senya grunted as she parried another blow, hoping there was still some part of the little girl she had raised inside the savage creature in front of her. "It clouds your mind." "You sound like Scorpio," Vaylin sneered, swiping ineffectually at the air where her target had been a split second before. "Always talking about logic and reason." "Is that who you take orders from now?" Senya pressed. "A machine?" Vaylin flicked her wrist, hurling Senya through the air to slam against the hull of one of the broken vessels surrounding the camp. Senya crumpled to the ground, momentarily stunned. "Scorpio is not the Empress," Vaylin snarled, striding towards her fallen opponent. She commands the Gemini fleet, but they all answer to me, and I am the one who sits on the eternal throne. Shaking her head to clear the fog, Senya rose to one knee. A few meters away on the other side, twin rows of flames blazed, the acrid smoke stinging her eyes and nostrils. She can't defeat me in hand-to-hand combat, but she could still kill me anytime she likes. She's been toying with me this whole time. Why does the throne even matter to you? She asked her daughter, still trying to reason with her. Her question froze Vaylin in her tracks, giving Senya enough time to get back up on her feet. Your brother always wanted to be the emperor, Senya reminded her, but you never used to care about that. Zakul needs a strong ruler, Vaylin replied, speaking slowly, and the throne is mine, by birth and by right. Those sound like Scorpio's words, Senya told her, but I don't believe that's what you really want. For several seconds Vaylin didn't answer. The silence broke only by the crackling flames. You know what I want, mother. To kill you. Vaylin held her lightsaber pike like a spear, looking to impale Senya against the hull of the broken shuttle, but Senya anticipated the move and rolled out of the way. The blade sliced through the metal plates and plunged deep into the side of the vessel. A shrill whine rose like a scream, the sound of pressurized coolant spewing from a punctured hyperdrive. Senya had just long enough to register what had happened before the damaged hyperdrive exploded. She came to a few seconds later, groggy, disoriented, and with her ears ringing. The blast had thrown her 20 meters. Tiny bits of twisted, melted metal that had once been in the hull of the ship lay all around her. Forcing herself to her hands and knees, Senya turned her head from side to side, looking for Vaylin, but all she saw was smoke and flame. The fires had spread to consume the entire camp. Arkan! Somehow Senya rose unsteadily to her feet and set off in a stumbling run back towards her ship and her son. As the flames fell farther and farther behind her, her head slowly cleared. Her thoughts briefly turned to the fallen knights consumed by the funeral pyre that had once been their camp. They'd risked their lives to help her, and Vaylin had slaughtered them all. She and Arkan were alone again, no allies, nowhere to turn, but she was still alive. Somehow, the blast should have vaporized me. But there was only one explanation for her survival. Vaylin must have used the Force to shield them both from the worst of the explosion. But why? So she can kill me later with her own hands? Or was she only trying to save herself? And I was just close enough to get caught up in her shield. And where is Vaylin now? She knew her daughter was still alive. On some level, Senya would have sensed her death. But even shielded by the Force, the blast would have been strong enough to leave Vaylin disoriented and weakened, vulnerable and fearing for her life. She might have fled. Or maybe she's still here. Maybe I'm leading her right to Arkan. Senya slowed her pace, though she was already near the shuttle. Her daughter hated her. She had seen it in her eyes, but what, if anything, did she feel for her brother? And if she's coming for him, can I even stop her? She still hadn't come up with an answer by the time she reached her shuttle, which was as dark and silent as when she'd left it. She punched in the access code and the boarding ramp extended. With one last look over her shoulder, Senya climbed quickly inside, sealing the ship behind her. The shuttle's interior lighting was dim, but compared to the blackness of the night, there was ample illumination. Her son lay where she had left him, unconscious on the bed, ensnared in the web of tubes, wires, and machines keeping him alive. Senya crouched over him and gently caressed his brow. In her fingertips, she felt his fever still raging, as hot as the flames that had consumed the knight's camp. "I will find some way to save you," she whispered, letting her hand drop. Taking a seat at the controls, she fired up the engines. A second later, the vessel shot skyward, swallowed by the darkness.
Ako dwelea enli razon, kivu kastaskan sivkonk igot, piru ege, rovid nap hotel.
It is not a foolish endeavor to try and anticipate one's future path, or even the path of an entire civilization. But it can be, if we do not first take stock of that which lies in our wake. We can never truly know how to negotiate the currents ahead. It is with this concern in mind that I indulge in this analysis of the ebb and flow of my dear home. Manaan, for a long time, longer than we have records for, the Infinite Empire ruled our world. They enslaved us until their eventual fall, and we, Selkath, vowed we would never be placed in servitude again. As off-world explorers eventually arrived on our world, they came to see our KOTOR as a vital resource in their contest for dominion over the galaxy. We in turn came to see how valuable KOTOR could be. Due to our history, however, we also saw how it could become a detriment. Therefore, my ancestors wisely vowed to remain neutral in the galactic fray. They even went so far as to allow both the Galactic Republic and the Sith Empire to establish embassies on our surface metropolis, SWTOR City. While their truce on our world was tense, the importance of KOTOR to their efforts gave them no choice but to conduct themselves in a lawful manner. At least, that was what we believed. A visit from a Jedi named Revan changed everything. He exposed a terrible truth, that the Sith were abducting and manipulating our youth, indoctrinating them into the ways of the dark side of the Force. This revelation did not sit well with my ancestors, and the resulting tensions eventually sparked an uprising led by one of those abducted children, Shaisa, by this point a powerful Force practitioner in her own right. The Sith were driven from SWTOR City, their embassy razed. We continued our relations with the Republic, but warily so, ever mindful of the pattern of transgressions visited upon us by off-worlders. More and more we Selkath turned to our Force-wielding Order of Shasa, so named for the brave architect of the Sith's ouster, for guidance. Taking after the pragmatic stance of their namesake, the Order sought the abolishment of the Republic Embassy from SWTOR City, thereby isolating Manaan from the ongoing turbulence beyond its waters. Ultimately, the action was unnecessary. Like how the flutter of a single fin is said to culminate in a great wave, it seemed as though our actions caused the Empire to crash and disperse. Tensions finally abated. For a time, we Selkath prospered. Many of our kind even ventured out into the great sea of stars in search of new lives and opportunities. We did not know it then, but like the fabled Binexan shark of the Sith Empire rose up off the black depths in a stronger, bolder form. When the resurgent Empire demanded our allegiance, my ancestors attempted to extend the same offer of neutrality they had found acceptable in the past. We only served to anger them. They bombarded our world from space, sinking nearly every last surface structure, SWTOR City included. With their inaction in our time of need, the Republic delivered the finishing blow, and this without having fired a single shot. Betrayed and embittered, we retreated to the depths, no longer willing to associate with any off-worlders in any way. To us, they were all slavers, abductors of our children, calm water friends at best. Those years are said by many to be the greatest in Selkath history. Our own culture and traditions thrived. There was little strife. In our independence from the rest of the galaxy, we were together, but many secretly yearned for the ways and means the off-worlders' presence brought, and we came to find ourselves in economic distress. After a great deal of debate, it was finally decided that, despite the lessons our past afforded us, our absence from the galactic stage was not to be permanent. As our first new surface structure in many years, the Mercantile Plaza opened with strict rules as to who was given landing privileges. At first, this meant only special ambassadors from Republic-aligned worlds were allowed to visit. By this time, I was heavily involved in shaping extraplanetary policy, and I pressed to extend an invitation to the Sith. I had been dissatisfied with the Republic's inaction in our time of need and did not wish to invite a second bombardment from their enemies. In the time since, once again offering the Empire a KOTOR trade agreement and a presence on Manaan, the Republic has proven itself a more assertive and competent ally than in the past. I can earnestly say they have won me over. That does not mean, however, that we should not renege in our deal with the Empire. It serves us well to strike a balance. After all, what guarantees do we have that either side would remain at arm's length if left unchecked? The answer to such questions lies in the churn of our wake.
SWTOR?
That voice, so familiar. despite the years since she last heard it. It sounded impossibly far away, yet close enough that she swiveled her head in search of its owner.
Sahar? Is that you?
The voice, its edges rippling with echoes, was louder, closer. She ran toward the sound, but her feet were heavy, like stone. And there he was. Sahar reached a trembling hand toward her brother she had not seen since she was taken to be trained by the Jedi. As her fingers inched closer, she could see her brother's gaunt face was marred by fear, by hopelessness. Just below, a heavy, rusted chain was tangled around his neck. But the moment Sahar's fingertips brushed the cold metal of his bonds, her vision blurred. A low, pulsing hum grew louder and louder. An unbearable heat washed over her body. She grasped for her brother wildly with both arms, but he crumbled away like dirt and ash at her touch. Sahar desperately called her brother's name as she woke, but the only response was the ceaseless rumbling of a ship's engine. As her vision cleared, the durasteel ceiling of the ship's sweltering lower levels slowly came into view. She was drenched in sweat, her limbs twisted in the rough sheet covering her cot. This was the 5th night in a row she'd had the same dream, spending every single one of her waking hours meditating, reaching out, hoping to find any clue that could lead to her brother was obviously starting to take its toll. But this was the first night where she got close enough to touch Recon, and she didn't like what had happened when she did. Was it a sign, or was it her own self-doubt creeping its way into even the subconscious parts of her mind? Sahar shoved a blanket down to the end of her cot and slid onto the floor, legs crossed and back straight. The passenger transport she'd snuck aboard was old and in desperate need of upgrades, but the utility room she'd quietly turned into a makeshift lodgings was close to the engine, and the steady vibrations of the struggling pistons and turbines made falling into a trance easy. She had barely closed her eyes and begun to concentrate when she was in that place again, somewhere deep in her mind, her unconsciousness flowing with the force as she called out to Recon.
Still find your brother.
His voice again, the Sith, Malgus. Sahar shook her head and recentered herself, reaching out desperately. If her dreams were a sign of reality, Recon needed her now.
Focus, Sahar.
She felt a sense of comfort wash over her as she remembered some of the first words her master ever said to her.
Do you know what it is your master just destroyed?
Sahar grit her teeth. Malgus's voice was getting louder. Accusations and angry questions fought to the forefront of her mind. It was Master Denolm's fault that her brother was in danger. She pushed Malgus's taunting aside and focused on finding Recon.
All your life you've been in a cage, Padawan.
Her eyes snapped open, her thoughts, her memories of Master Denolm. They were becoming increasingly tainted, corrupted by Malgus's words. And the more she meditated in search of her brother, the more they jostled and crowded her mind like a noxious gas. Short distance from her, wrapped tightly in a tattered cloak she stole, the holocron Sahar found as she slipped away from the ruined temple on Elam began to pulse. The relic was always vibrating with latent energy, but now it was more intense. It was almost signing to her. Did it know? Could it sense what she wanted? Sahar slid over to the other side of her hastily made quarters and slowly unwrapped the holocron. It was glowing, brighter than before, as if it were answering her question. Malgus said it could be the key to finding Recon, but he couldn't be trusted. Master Denolm said so, but Master Denolm lied too. She wasn't completely clueless when it came to old Force relics like this one. Master Denolm was a historian, after all, and she'd lost count of how many they had dug up together. In her experience, there was always a chance that it could hold something dangerous, but more often than not, it was just information, nothing more, nothing less. What could be so bad about that? This holocron was unlike any other she'd ever seen. Its design was beautiful, intricate, but extremely complex. It felt like it could shatter if someone who didn't know what they were doing tried to handle it. Sahar pressed the edges of the holocron with her fingertips and twisted. Something felt like it gave way, but it stayed firmly closed. She applied more pressure, connecting herself to the relic with the force. She could feel something, a tension inside the holocron, building, cresting. So she pushed, and the holocron pushed back. She threw her arms up to shield herself from what felt like a giant crashing wave. The sheer force of it knocked her away from the holocron and onto her back. As she recovered, the holocron's thrumming pulse was quieter. Its glow dimmed. Scrambling to her feet, Sahar fought the urge to scream. She wasn't completely sure the engine noise would hide it, and she didn't want anyone poking their nose in. She pulled her foot back, but her attempt to kick the holocron was interrupted by the grumbling of her empty stomach. It had been a very long time since she last ate. She took a few deep breaths and put her foot back on the floor. She stretched her legs, flexing her ankles and toes. She closed her eyes and tried to sense anyone who might be outside her stowaway's quarters, but she felt nothing. Everyone else must have gone to bed. Carefully, Sahar slid open the door and peered around into the hall. Darkness, silence, the perfect opportunity to sneak into the galley. As she crept through the dark corridor and up the stairwell, her stomach protested again, urging her to hurry and satisfy it. She hadn't been this hungry since she lived on Ossus with Master Denol in a colony full of refugees, being built from the ground up. Before they were able to get the farms to produce anything, it was rough. Food was a blessing, and one that had to be shared. Everyone who lived in that colony learned how to make do with next to nothing. But this, stealing supplies, hijacking a shuttle to get away from Elon, stowing away, this was all new. Then again, a lot of the events of the last few days were uncharted territory for Sahar. The galley was as empty as the corridor leading into it. Sahar stepped into it as quietly and slowly as she could. The room was cast in near complete darkness, except for a light someone had thoughtlessly, helpfully, in Sahar's case, left on in one of the pantries. She was halfway to the pantry door when something clattered to the floor. The sound of metal on metal rang throughout the galley, and Sahar froze. A figure appeared in the pantry doorway, outlined by the light inside. She was only a little taller than Sahar, but older. Her brown hair was cropped at the chin, and she stood on two cybernetic legs. "Oh, sorry," the woman smiled. "I hope I didn't scare you. I didn't think anyone else would be in here." Sahar couldn't find the words to respond. The woman's clothes were plain, unremarkable, but they weren't those of a mechanic or a crew member. She was probably a passenger who wouldn't know or care that she'd just caught a stowaway. "I guess I'm not the only one who can't sleep when they're hungry." The woman held up a faded, dented can and a saucepan that had clearly seen better days. "I was just going to have some of this garfish stew. I don't think anyone would mind." She peered at the can. "I can't believe they even have it. Want some?" Sahar slowly nodded and the woman pushed the door open wider, the pantry light fully bathing Sahar's face and the galley's preparation area. Sahar turned and faced away from the woman, willing her pounding heart to slow. She stepped closer to the table near the pantry and gently took down two of the chairs that had been placed on its surface. "Thanks," the woman said as she poured the stew into the saucepan. "It shouldn't take more than a few minutes." Soon after, a pungent smell drifted through the galley. Sahar could smell how spicy the dish was as the woman poured two helpings into bowls and set them onto the table. "I don't mind eating in silence," the woman said as she sat across from Sahar, "but I think dinner is always better with someone else. I'm glad you showed up." Sahar cleared her throat and pulled a bowl toward her. "Tao. My name is Tao. Nice to meet you, Tao." The woman collected some of the stew onto her spoon, blew away the steam and tasted it. Not bad. Sahar had a bite of her own. It was more than not bad. She wasn't sure if it was because she hadn't eaten in days, but it might have been the best thing she had ever tasted. Silence filled the space between them as she devoured the stew. "Well, that's probably the biggest compliment my cooking's ever gotten." Sahar couldn't help but smirk. "It's really great. Thank you, by the way. Happy to help." The woman took another bite, and as the silence returned, stretching into the darkness, she swirled her spoon in her half-empty bowl. "So, what do you do, Tao?" Sahar coughed and tried to cover it with another spoonful of stew. Do? Sorry," the woman laughed. "When I said dinner is always better with someone else, I really meant I hate awkward silences." Sahar smiled, tight-lipped, desperately hoping it masked her racing thoughts. I'm a farmer." "Wow, really?" the woman grinned. "Me too." "I mean, I was a farmer." Sahar's spoon scraped across the bottom of her bowl. "I had to leave." "Oh, well, that's a shame." The woman furrowed her brows. "Unless it's not. You wanted to do something else?" I don't know actually." Sahar pushed a now empty bowl to the middle of the table. She could feel the sting of tears ready to well in her eyes, but she gritted her teeth against them. My father died. He was the one who taught me everything. about farming. The woman's face fell, pity plainly etched in her expression. Sahar leaned back and crossed her arms over her chest, as if she were raising a shield. I know he would want me to keep going, keep doing everything he showed me how to do, but...
Destroy this machine, and all records of it!
But I don't know if that's what I want to do anymore, Sahar snapped. I'm sorry. The woman had finished her meal too. Frowning, she pushed her empty bowl next to Sahar's. I'm really sorry. I lost my mom when I was young. The woman looked at Sahar with an openness and honesty that Sahar had difficulty recognizing. With how much truth had been hidden from her for her entire life, the sight of someone so eager to listen and understand was enticing. I'm sorry too, Sahar swallowed. And my father?
How many were left behind? So that the Jedi could play God.
He had a lot of secrets that I'm only just now finding out about. They make me wonder if I ever really knew him, if I should have listened to him, if he set me on the right path. That's really tough. There was a tremble in the woman's voice. Believe it or not, I know what that's like too. To have a father who hides things from you, even though he thinks what he's doing is for your own good. Sahar felt a twinge in her chest. What? How did you deal with it? All of that, I mean. Well, it didn't happen right away. There was always something, like a shadow, in the back of my mind. Even after I talked to him about it and got the answers I needed, that shadow always made me ask why he wasn't around. Why wasn't I good enough to get him to stay?
You could have saved my brother.
The woman stood up and grabbed the 2 empty dishes. It took me a long time to realize that the choices my father made had nothing to do with me, she said as she carried the bowls to the food preparation area. Even though he swore that he was only off running spice and blasters because he needed the credits for me.
I've only ever protected you.
She placed the bowls in an empty dish basin and turned back towards Sahar. Eventually it hit me. Loving my father didn't mean he was perfect. No one can be, no matter how important they are to you.
You must trust me.
The woman moved back to the table. Once I figured that out, the other pieces fell into place. My father is only human. He handled misfortune and hardship the way he thought was best. He made choices he thought were right. Even though I don't agree with him, I know I can give him enough grace to understand that.
Was I chosen by the Force?
The woman sat down across from Sahar again, but that's all I can give him. Love and forgiveness for the past. Beyond that, all that's left is for me. My time and my focus go to what I want to do, who I want to be.
Or you?
I'm sorry. The woman let out a clipped laugh. I really didn't mean to give you a lecture or anything. She smiled. But it is nice to have someone listen. I know, Sahar replied, barely above a whisper. She wrapped her arms tightly around herself. Now that the comfort of the warm meal was gone, she was intensely aware of the cold that began to creep across her skin. Thank you, Sahar said as she got to her feet, the legs of her chair skidding across the galley's metal floor. For the food. Before the woman could answer, Sahar turned and marched toward the galley door. Oh, thank you for the company. Sahar could hear the woman's voice fading behind her. See you around, Tao. As soon as she was enveloped in the shadows of the corridor, she walked faster, back toward her cramped room. The garfish stew suddenly felt like it was a heavy stone inside of her. Her breath came quick and short, like she couldn't get enough air at all, like she was back on Elon, trapped in the ruined temple. Back in her room, Sahar waved her arm, slamming the door shut with the force as she collapsed onto the edge of her cot. Doubled over, she clutched the sides of her head, the woman's words replaying in her mind. All that's left is for me. What I want to do, who I want to be. Sahar felt more lost, more adrift than ever. Being Master Denorm's Padawan was all she knew how to be. He was gone. What was left? Through the pulsing hum of the transport's engines, a smaller, more delicate sound seeped into the air. Sahar looked to the holocron. Sitting a short distance away, it trilled, quietly, again and again. Its faint blue glow had returned. Sahar picked the holocron up from where she'd dropped it. The relic settled easily into her grasp.
Do you know what it is your master just destroyed?
This time, as Sahar worked against the holocron, it felt less resistant, more pliant. It wanted her to see, to understand.
It's not too late. You can still find your brother.
Rikan, Master Denorm, made the wrong choice. Master Denorm made the wrong choice when he refused to take her brother, and he never told her about Rikan's abilities. Another wrong decision made under the pretense of protecting Sahar. Gears clicked into place, metal and crystal slid away, the light shining from inside the holocron almost blinding now, projected designs, patterns as elaborate and perplexing as the markings on the outside of the relic on the durasteel walls. Sahar's eyes widened as she scanned the spreading illustrations. In all the time she helped Master Denolm with his research, she had never seen anything like this. The only thing that came close were the tattered remains of text they found in the ruined Jedi library they explored together on Ossus. The memories of her dead master's teachings came flooding back as she started to recognize and piece together what she was seeing. A tear, blistering against her skin, slid down her face. She felt hot from the inside, like she would burst into flames at any moment. She couldn't be completely sure, but she could see enough to know that the plans in this holocron were different. Whatever the machine on Elom had been, this was something else. Something more. This device wasn't meant to just find forgotten souls, as Malgus suggested the machine Master Denolm had destroyed might do. It was meant to speak to them, to ignite, like kindling, something inside them. A loud bang startled Sahar as the holocron hit the floor. The blue glowing plans were all gone. The relic was silent and dark at her feet. Despite all his power, all his knowledge, Master Denolm was still human. He knew what this machine could do, what could happen if she tried to use it, and he did what he thought was best.
Sahar.
She could give him forgiveness, understanding. Beyond that, all that was left was for Sahar, who she wanted to be, and what she wanted to do. She couldn't remember the last time Master Denolm had held her gaze so earnestly.
I'm sorry.
I know, Sahar whispered. The transport's engines hummed in response. It's okay, but I have to do this. Cradled by the sound of the steadily pulsing ship, Sahar sank to the floor. She closed her eyes, pulled her knees to her chest, and listened.
Focus, Sahar.
Sahar's eyes opened, and the ship was gone. A younger Master Denolm sat across from her, on the floor of the orphanage where her life began. Rikan was by her side, bouncing excitedly, grinning, eager to impress the Jedi who came to see them. Master Denolm smiled as he extended his hand, offering a simple toy. Trust yourself, he offered kindly. You can do this. It may be difficult, but it is not impossible. Sahar reached both hands toward the toy, and before she could pull it to herself, recreate what had happened so long ago, she was somewhere else. A well-made but cramped shuttle, the kind the less affluent Republic senators favoured, speeding through hyperspace. She used to see them on the occasions Master Denolm took her to Coruscant, the world that they and the rest of the last remaining Jedi were fleeing. This isn't over, Sahar. Master Denolm's voice was strained as he wrapped his cloak around her shoulders. She was still shaking from their clash with the brutal invaders who were tearing their way through the Republic. Suffering like this cannot last forever, and we must be ready to pick up the pieces when it ends. She looked up at his determined face, now silhouetted by the blazing Ossus sun high in the sky behind them. The soil beneath her knees was dry, cracking. The evidence of her failure to grow a patch of barbaral fruit surrounded them. Master Denolm extended his hand and helped Sahar to her feet. The Force chose you. I chose you. I know how much you are capable of, even if you don't see it yet. He turned and walked away, and Sahar followed. In a few paces, the Ossus desert gave way to an icy wasteland. She was following him toward the entrance of the temple ruins on Elom. Master Denolm stopped, his gaze rising to the top of the ruins. Sahar stood at his side. She could sense his fear, the inner struggle to convince himself he was doing the right thing, and the strongest of all, his efforts to push all his hesitation away. But moments will come when doubts are darkest, when I won't be there to tell you. Master Denolm turned to her. You will have to tell yourself, to choose yourself, and you will need to believe it. And then he was gone. Elom was gone. Sahar was alone. All around her, nothing but a dusty, lifeless desolation. But in the distance, she could see a dark figure, no bigger than a pinprick on the horizon. She walked toward, and the dark figure grew as they approached each other. She could see him clearly now, right in front of her. He was older, different, but she would recognize her brother anywhere. He looked like a fighter, strong and powerful. Around his neck were the chains Sahar saw in her nightmares, but they were broken, Unbound by anything, he smiled at her and extended both his hands. When she reached out to clasp them, there was a knife cradled in his palms.
When you're ready, break free.
She opened her eyes, but the darkness was still there. The heat and the noise told her she was still on the floor of her space on the transport. The holocron was lit by a soft glow again, dim but steady. The overwhelming, suffocating defeat she'd felt since she escaped Elam was gone. Instead, she could feel a pull in the Force, a bond connecting her to her brother, a compass guiding Sahar to Rikan. Sahar stood, grabbed the tattered cloak she'd been hiding the holocron in, and draped the cloth over the relic. She bundled it up and stashed it with her few other belongings so she could snatch them up and run as soon as the transport reached its destination, in a few days' time. When they arrived, she'd have to sneak aboard a new ship, but this time she knew where she was heading. This time she knew what she needed to do, and who she needed to be: a warrior, a liberator, a friend, a sister. Sahar lay back on her cot and willed herself to calm down. She would need plenty of rest for the fight ahead. As she relaxed the tension in her muscles, her mind drifted. She thought of Rikan, of Master Dinolm, of the woman in the galley. Before long her mind eased into sleep, content in knowing that for the first time in a long while, nightmares would not come. The Star Wars The Old Republic universe is set in the year of 3640 BBY, in which we saw the return and rise of the Sith Empire under the rule of Darth Vitiate. But there is more to know from when before Star Wars The Old Republic began. 32,800 years before the Treaty of Coruscant, many philosophers, gurus, shamans, and even scientists from all stretches of the galaxy gathered together on the planet Typhon to collectively learn and teach each other. This was further taken into research and practice, and the result was discovering the existence of the Force. These incredible people shared their knowledge of each other and achieved a new level of enlightenment through the Force. This discovery would bring about the birth of a private type community on Typhon, reserved for only those with the potential to tap into and listen to the Force. Over time, this community would grow vastly and new avenues of the Force began to be discovered. 10,660 years later, some of the scholars, monks and researchers of Typhon learned they were able to use the Force as a tool that could elevate them to power. This new idea caused a split within the community and the Force War of Typhon took place. The ensuing conflict would last for 10 years. In 22,130 BTC, Typhon was in ruin, scarred by the vandalism of the past war. The survivors of the conflict banded together and moved to a new location on Typhon. These survivors agreed that the conflict must end, and together they gave birth to the Jedi Order. They wrote themselves a code to live by that would help guide them down the path of righteousness and peace. We know this now as the Jedi Code. 730 years later, the wider galaxy becomes even wider as hyperdrive technology becomes mainstream. New worlds and star systems join together to form a democratic alliance so that they may explore and trade together safely and securely. They named this alliance the Republic. Exactly 100 years later, the Jedi Order on Typhon had become so fabled that they were asked to join the Republic Alliance. The Jedi Order accepted and swore loyalty to the Republic in perpetuity. Not much else is known from this period, but we do know that the Republic and Jedi worked very closely together moving forward. The Jedi Temple on Coruscant was built as a symbol of their presence within the Republic and on Coruscant, which eventually became known to be the most famous Jedi Temple in the galaxy. Over more time, the Jedi spread and began to construct more temples on new worlds, until eventually some worlds became lost in history, with their coordinates also lost in time. It was also possible for great storms and hyperspace lanes to affect travel to worlds from time to time. So much time had passed that many of the Jedi's own history became blurred and uncertain. Even the name Jedi was spelled differently by this time, which was likely done in an act to modernize or make the word easier to pronounce to everyone in the galaxy. 17,953 years later, a dark shadow grew over the Jedi Order as a group of Jedi led by one master discovered a new path to power. a new way to interact with the Force. The dark side was born and embraced by one Jedi named Ajunta Pall. This Jedi disagreed with the Jedi Code and sought to bring about a new order of things. However, this Jedi and the group that followed him were defeated and banished from the Republic. This time would become known as the Second Great Jedi Schism. Another 100 years later, and these exiled Jedi, along with their leader Ajunta Pall, found refuge on the planet Korriban. The exiled group amazed the natives of this world, who were red-skinned beings named Sith. With their powers in the Force, they were also able to force any one of them to submit. Eventually, Ajunta Pall became the first known Dark Lord, and the Order of the Sith began. 1,900 years later, the Sith Order had risen in so much power that it felt ready to challenge the Jedi and Republic as a whole for dominance over the galaxy. This happened when Marka Ragnos died and Naga Sadow succeeded him as a ruler of the Sith Empire. However, Naga Sadow was betrayed by his own apprentice, was eventually defeated, which forced him into exile. The remnants of the Sith were hunted down and destroyed by the Republic at its Chancellor's orders. The Sith were followed back to Korriban and were defeated once again on their home world. The Jedi ransacked the Korriban Academy and its surrounding temples in the Valley of the Dark Lords. All knowledge, datacrons and teachings were confiscated and stored on Coruscant or completely destroyed. This action alone weakened the Sith Empire more than losing any war could. Valuable powers and traits were lost because of this. 96 years later, the hidden Sith Empire that was ruled by Darth Vitiate began to build its power in secrecy on Dromund Kaas. Over time, they had built a completely new capital city and even rose a huge Sith armada. It was Grand Moff Vykin that spearheaded the army creation, and he even created the Imperial Training Regime, which still exists even now. The Sith Empire was successful in remaining hidden for the next 1,000 years. In 347 BTC, this was the Exar Kun War. This fallen Jedi was able to discover the spirit of Freedon Nard, who led him further down the dark side path. Exar Kun was able to rediscover Yavin 4 and established his own rule over the Sith as a Dark Lord. Eventually, another Dark Jedi named Ulic Queldroma challenged Exar Kun but was defeated, and then became Exar Kun's apprentice. As tradition dictates though, the apprentice betrayed the master and Exar Kun was pushed back to Yavin 4. In response, Exar Kun performed a ritual that disposed of his physical form and allowed him to walk the realm as a Force spirit instead. However, the Jedi met Exar Kun on Yavin 4 and were able to imprison him in his temple, where he still walks today. 36 years later is an era that should be familiar. This is the Mandalorian Wars and the Jedi, Revan, Malak and Mitra Surik's story and background. 8 years later is once again another familiar era, as this is the Jedi Civil War that broke out after Revan and Malak were knighted Dark Lords. To learn this story in its full extent, check out my Revan and the Sith Emperor video. Another 200 years later, the Republic continued to believe it was safe and free of the Sith Empire for now over 1,000 years. However, the Sith Emperor had spies and agents across the galaxy while he hid in secrecy with his empire. Many Jedi over the years were actually under his control or somehow working for him. One such case saw a Jedi Master infiltrate the Jedi Order on behalf of the Sith Emperor, for the sake of researching Naga Sadow. The Emperor wanted to make sure only the Republic was his enemy when he returned, and took steps to make sure no ancient Sith were lurking in the shadows could be a potential problem to him. However, his efforts with Naga Sadow were unsuccessful. 28 years before the Treaty of Coruscant, the Sith Empire returned in all its might. The Sith struck hard and fast within the Outer Rim, causing the galaxy to panic and the Republic Armada to retreat. Over the next 28 years, which led to the Treaty of Coruscant, the Sith were able to seize control of their homeworld and build alliances with new systems. The Sith had even brought about the return of the Mandalorians through funding and secrecy in Imperial intelligence. They became strong allies and together were able to blockade the Republic and Jedi, which closed off a major trade route. It was the smuggler Hyler Viz that managed to break the blockade and balance the scales of war. The Empire and Republic fought each other relentlessly and millions of lives were lost, all of which fueled the Emperor's true power. Eventually, the Emperor gave the order to make peace with the Republic, and the events of Star Wars The Old Republic soon after begins. If you'd like to see more videos like this one, remember to subscribe. Thank you for watching everyone, I'll catch you in the next one. May the Force be with you. In the wake of the cataclysmic Great Hyperspace War that transpired in 5000 BBY, the Sith Empire, reeling from defeat, retreated to the far reaches of the galaxy, seeking refuge on the world of Dromund Kars. Not even their ancient homeworld of Korriban remained safe for them. During this era, the Sith Empire predominantly comprised with Sith purebloods and humans, staunchly rejecting the inclusion of aliens within their ranks. It was during this time that a formidable Sith Lord, later known as the Sith Emperor Vitiate, rallied the remaining Sith Lords and established their clandestine sanctuary on the world of Dromund Kars. For a millennium, the Sith Empire remained concealed, orchestrating its resurgence in the shadows. Many centuries later, approximately 30 years prior to the resurgence of the Sith Empire, a Sith pureblood named Darth Icarul emerged as a prominent figure. An esteemed veteran within the Empire, Icarul championed the notion of purity within the Sith Order, advocating that only Sith purebloods should be considered true Sith. Rumours had surfaced that he belonged to an enigmatic group called the Order of Ragnos, a sect shrouded in mystery and scarce historical references. Amidst the limited information about the Order of Ragnos, it was speculated that they might be connected to the Cult of Ragnos, which found mention in the classic Jedi Knight game. To date, no other records have surfaced regarding anyone else identifying themselves as part of the Order of Ragnos. Delving into the origins of Darth Icarul himself proved challenging, with no documented records of his birth date. However, based on historical accounts, it is reasonable to assume that he is a minimum of 200 years old, though some historians conjecture that he could be significantly older. The pivotal moment in Icarul's life came when he garnered the attention and blessing of none other than the Sith Emperor Vitiate himself. Such a prestigious blessing marked the pinnacle of recognition and prestige within the Sith Empire, a testament to Icarul's formidable prowess in the dark side of the Force. Under the Emperor's auspices, Darth Icarul was entrusted with a monumental responsibility, commanding the Imperial Dreadnought, a fearsome vessel christened as the Red Reaper. This powerful vessel became Icarul's instrument to embark on a galaxy-spanning quest, seeking out scattered Sith purebloods who had failed to reunite with the Sith Empire over a millennium ago. In the year 3712 BBY, Darth Icarul embarked on his epic odyssey, venturing into the uncharted depths of the cosmos, unyielding in his mission to reunite the lost Sith purebloods with their ancestral empire. As the Sith Empire presumed him missing in action or possibly deceased, Icarul became an enduring symbol of martyrdom, a true Sith Lord who had sacrificed his life in pursuit of an ideal he held dear. Yet, the reality of Darth Icarul's fate remained veiled in mystery. Concealed from the galaxy at large, 70 years had passed, and it was not until 3642 BBY that Icarul, against all expectations, resurfaced in the known galaxy. Upon his return, Darth Icarul was met with profound disillusionment. The Sith Empire he had left behind had achieved military victory over the Republic, yet also had entered into a peace treaty, relinquishing the worlds they had conquered. Moreover, the Sith Emperor himself had taken a controversial stance by permitting alien slaves to become acolytes, a move that deeply offends Icarul's sense of purity. In the wake of this profound discontent, Darth Icarul set forth an unprecedented mission to confront both the Republic and Sith Empire simultaneously. He would now lay claim to his ancestry, tracing his lineage back all the way to the revered King Adas, the original Sith Ali. Icarul asserted his right to rule as the new leader of the Sith Empire. During his 70-year sojourn through the galaxy, Icarul had tirelessly sought out and united any and all Sith purebloods he encountered, amassing an army comprised solely of pure-blooded Sith. Alas, Even with this formidable force at his disposal, the empire he once cherished had evolved beyond his vision, becoming an entity he could no longer abide. In the face of these tumultuous developments, both the Republic and the Sith Empire deemed Icaru's actions as a dangerous threat to their interests. Consequently, they dispatched a formidable strike team to neutralize this rogue Sith pureblood. In the ensuing conflict, Darth Icaru's fearsome vessel, the Red Reaper, along with all of its followers, met a tragic end, leaving the legacy of King Adas's bloodline shrouded in uncertainty. It appeared that this was the sorrowful conclusion of an extraordinary journey. In the annals of galactic history, the rise and fall of Darth Icaru and the lost Sith Empire leave behind a poignant testament to the impermanence of power and complexities of destiny. His quest for purity, though noble in its aspirations, ultimately met with the harsh realities of change and evolution. Yet in his voyage, we find profound lessons about the human spirit, indomitable will to seek the truth, and pursue a sense of belonging. As we bid adieu to this enthralling tale, we urge you to ponder the lesson learned from the timeless saga. Until we meet again, may the Force guide you on your own journey of discovery, ever mindful of the delicate balance between the allure of power and the call for unity. In the year of 3653 BBY, the Treaty of Coruscant was signed, and amid the shifting tides of destiny, a mysterious world called Vos was unveiled to the larger galaxy, bringing with enigmatic wonders and extraordinary gifts.
A mystic is never wrong. A mystic sees. The Vos respond.
Vos, a world of prophetic mystics, blessed with the rare ability of clairvoyance through the Force, captured the attention of none other than the terrifying Sith Emperor Vitiate. It was Darth Baras, a cunning Sith Lord, who brought the knowledge of Vos's secrets to his sovereign, luring him into a web of dark intrigue. Little did the Sith Emperor know that Darth Baras had delved even deeper into the mysteries of Vos. He discovered a terrifying revelation. Those who dared to enter the Dark Heart, a place of immense dark side power, would be forever trapped, bound to a malevolent entity known as SWTOR.
Defile her, trespasser! SWTOR warns. Retreat, relent. Death awaits.
Darth Baras, driven by ambition, urged the Sith Emperor to take a Vos alien as his new vessel, promising him access to darker secrets that awaited on Vos. Persuaded by Baras's words, the Sith Emperor journeyed to Vos to confront the ominous being known as SWTOR. SWTOR, a nearly 2,000-year-old entity, wielded dark-side power that rivaled even the Sith Emperor's might. He fed off the death and suffering of his own world, expanding his domain into the haunting landscape called the Nightmare Lands. As SWTOR's corrupting influence spread, the Sith Emperor's curiosity was piqued, leading him to venture into the treacherous Dark Heart. But to his dismay, he found his body ensnared, unable to leave unless his physical form was destroyed. Trapped and unable to escape, the Sith Emperor's fate seemed sealed until the arrival of his wrath, a chosen Sith warrior bound to eliminate the Emperor's adversaries. The Sith warrior embarked on a perilous journey to Vos, seeking to free the Emperor from his dark prison. To accomplish this, the Sith warrior had to strike down the Emperor's body, enabling him to return to his empire.
Forever bound! SWTOR takes this body. Such power.
Enraged by the warrior's interference, SWTOR attempted to seize control of the Emperor's body, but the Sith warrior's strength proved formidable, ultimately liberating the Sith Emperor from his confinements. Freed from the Dark Heart, the Emperor now bore a vengeful grudge against SWTOR. He vowed to obliterate the ancient entity before it could ever pose a threat to him again. And so, the Emperor dispatched Lord Fulminus to Vos to initiate the preparations for a ritual that would consume the world. Lord Fulminus forged a deceptive alliance with SWTOR, orchestrating a deadly plague to ravage the planet and trigger an abundance of death. The Emperor craved this surge of life force, intending to consume all life on Voss, including the malevolent entity itself. But destiny had other plans. The hero of Typhon, a valiant Jedi Knight, stepped forward to thwart the Emperor's sinister machinations. Their battle against Lord Fulminus and Selma Core would decide the fate of Voss. In a legendary clash, the hero of Typhon emerged victorious, ending Selma Core's menace once and for all. The world of Voss was saved from impending doom. This victory, however, brought the hero of Typhon to the Sith Emperor's attention. The Emperor saw in this Jedi Knight a formidable adversary and harbinger of challenges yet to come. Stay tuned for the hero of Typhon Explained, coming soon to this channel. Don't forget to subscribe to witness the unfolding saga of bravery, betrayal, and the eternal struggle between light and dark. Thank you for watching this video, and as always, may the Force be with you.